Are we getting too many IPs at the Disney parks? Let's discuss. Welcome to Princess and Scoundrel, where we take you along our scrappily ever after from Fantasyland to Tatooine and everything in between. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Steven.
And we are talking Fantasyland, we're talking Tatooine, we're talking the big blue sky in between. Almost said something else. The blue sky in between. So I went to the D23 Expo a few weeks ago, and the thing that I was most looking forward to was learning the new things that are coming to the Disney parks.
Yeah. Well, I think most of the people going, like, this is the main thing that people go to, is to see what's new coming to Disney,
right?
To the Disney parks.
Yeah. And I mean, they touched on like the cruises and a bunch of different things, but like the Disney parks, that's kind of our bread and butter here. So I was really looking forward to it. And they talked about the new stuff around all of it, but the big focus of the presentation was around this blue sky presentation that they had at the end of it, where they just threw out these grand ideas about what they think they could do in the parks without committing to doing anything.
Yeah, I think from that, some of the people were upset was that they didn't give us like a concrete answer, like what's coming.
Right.
I kind of feel like that came from Tron. Like, because they said this was going to happen and it didn't happen year after year after year. And there was other reasons why it didn't happen.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen in that schedule. And so people were upset that it didn't happen at that schedule.
Right.
So they just kind of said, hey, we have these ideas.
Like a darned if you do, darned if you don't kind of thing. And they made a joke about Tron too. And they were like, we know we've talked about it. And we've talked about it. And we've talked about it. Josh Jamero just kept going. But the other thing is like the Mary Poppins attraction that they announced that was going to come to Epcot at the last big D23 Expo. They announced it and then never talked about it again.
Yeah.
And like the pandemic, all these things happened, but...
So yeah, I think it's, instead of like letting us down, they are using this opportunity to vet what's going to be coming out. Because here's all these grand ideas. Immediately after, people are saying, oh, that shouldn't go here, that should go at this, or in that area, this should go.
Yeah.
It's like, so they're letting the community decide or give them ideas of where things should go, if it matches, if everything goes together.
Crowdsourcing it, if you will.
Yeah.
So a few of the things that they announced is they were really around Walt Disney World. The first one was Animal Kingdom, and I think they pretty much all but said like Dino Land is going away at this point. But the things that they're talking about replacing it with is Zootopia and Moana, and they showed some concept art for that. And then over at Magic Kingdom, they asked, have you ever wondered what's on the other side of Big Thunder Mountain? To which everyone replied, no, not really. And they said, well, turns out there could be in this blue sky that we have Coco, there could be Encanto, there could even be this dark park that everyone's been asking about, which is kind of like the crowdsourcing of a villain's land. Yeah.
And then of course, there has to be the people upset about it. There was Disney's just bringing in IPs. They're taking away, Dino Land and bringing in IPs.
Right.
And I think that kind of got us thinking about IPs in general. Like, what is an IP? So, Sarah, can you help us?
I can. So, an IP is intellectual property, and it is any creative property that can hold a trademark or a copyright or a patent. So typically, and like in the purpose of this conversation, it's going to be movies, TV shows, characters, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Disney owns a lot of IPs. But the weird thing about it is that the history of Disney's IPs is actually from not taking, but using other people's intellectual property that became like, what is it called? Public domain.
Yeah.
So I think everybody knows like the original princess stories were Grimm's fairy tales.
Yeah. And they were able to make IPs based off of almost sub-characters. So it wasn't the main, the princess per se, but it was off of Maleficent and her having certain colors and her high collar, the horns or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that's how they were able to, create their own IP to this
Right.
public domain, because anybody can make a Snow White story or,
but your Snow White can't look like Disney's Snow White.
Yeah.
And your Snow White story can't have the Seven Dwarfs singing Hi Ho and all of these things, like the songs, everything they put into it that is specifically Disney, that's copyrighted. But yeah, the Grimm's Fairy Tales, like their IP, their hold over the IP, like expired. And so anybody can go do these things.
Just like how Winnie the Pooh, or Disney's Winnie the Pooh, is now going to be public domain. And if I recall, isn't Mickey going to be public domain? So
in like
that'll
a couple
be interesting
years.
that, how and if they are going to let that happen. I mean, I
don't see how.
If it's a brand of it, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. That's another conversation.
Yeah, that's another conversation.
But about the IPs and bringing more IPs into the park and maybe some dissent around that is you could have too much IPs in the park or you could have no IPs in a park. And there was a park that opened with no IPs in it, and that was Disney California Adventure. And it didn't go so well for that. There were a handful of reasons why DCA wasn't very successful from the outset, but not having IPs there, I think really hurt them.
So, there's a lot of reasons why DCA probably failed or was considered a not success. But I think because it was across, right next door to Disneyland, people were showing Disney using their time and money going towards Disneyland and not, going to the parks, not going to this quote unquote original idea.
Yeah.
Where it was, again, a love letter to California.
Yeah. I mean, yes, you could say it's a smaller park. There's not as many attractions. There's, it's really like a half-day park, but it was the same price as going to Disneyland. But ultimately, one of the things that has helped DCA to become a success is implementing more IPs in the park. We had, Paradise Pier. That was rethemed to Pixar Pier. We have Cars Land. We have Avengers Campus now, and they're putting in IPs all throughout the park. And it's making it a park that you really want to go to, especially with Avengers Campus now. That's a huge IP, having Marvel presence in a Disney park that is going to be a big attraction there.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's not just slapping a Mickey on a Ferris wheel, but it's actually taking rides, creating new lands like Marvel, like Adventures Campus, or taking a ride and reimagining it, like the Tower of Terror going into the Mission Breakout.
Right.
They changed the mechanics of the ride to make it a different experience. And I think that's when they take and implement an IP in a good way.
Yeah.
They change the ride. They still give us that experience that we want to go to it and enjoy this attraction with the added bonus of having an IP attached to it. I go back to think of the Stitch ride over at Magic Kingdom, that it was an attraction before that was quote unquote an original idea.
What was the name of that one?
The Extraterrestrial Experience.
Close. Alien Encounter.
There you go.
But you got the big word.
Yeah. It's weird because it has terror in the middle.
Yeah.
But they changed it a little bit, put Stitch on it, an IP. People, the guests showed that they still didn't enjoy that attraction.
Yep.
And so it hasn't come back, or is not coming back.
No.
And I think that's something that, the Imagineers and Disney is still conscious about, is making sure that they give us a good experience for that attraction. And if they're able to integrate an IP, they're going to try to.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about Mission Breakout and changing the ride mechanics. I don't even know if people realize, like, instead of Tower of Terror, where the sensation is more of being dropped, Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout is more about like being pulled up and like hanging in the air. And we learned that from watching the Imagineering story. But it's interesting that they do that. And then they changed the queue for the ride too. So instead of going into that study and you watch the TV with Twilight Zone, technically an IP. I don't think it was owned by...
No.
Twilight Zone wasn't owned by Disney. It was one of those weird, like, kind of like Star Tours where they loaned it out.
Yeah.
But you get to feel, you don't feel like you're going into Tower of Terror and then there happens to be the Guardians of the Galaxy when you get on the actual ride. They've rethemed the entire thing so you realize going into it. And you know, because it's Guardians of the Galaxy, it's going to be a great soundtrack. You know from seeing these things, like you already have expectations because you're a fan of Guardians of the Galaxy, probably, who isn't, that what to expect with the ride. You know that there's going to be some banter, some sarcasm, some jokes, some great music, some aliens. And so you go in there with not high hopes, but just kind of expectations of what you're going to get. And then you get that payoff of the Guardians and the fantastic ride that is Tower of Terror.
Well, yeah, I think that speaks to the genius of, Disney marketing, because they are bringing in, something that you like already to have you ride this ride.
Yeah. Well, even so, staying with DCA for a little longer, the Incredicoaster. We never did California Screamin' when it was California Screaming because we're very new to Disneyland, but we did the Incredicoaster when we were there. And they're not just, that one's kind of an outdoor queue, so you're not really experiencing a queue like you would with Mission Breakout. But for Incredicoaster, they've implemented the Incredibles characters throughout the entire ride. The story is happening while you're on the ride. You get to count all the Jack Jacks. You get to smell the Num Num cookies. You see all the different iterations of Jack Jack. And that's really cool too, because you're a fan of Incredibles. You know the story already, but the ride itself is helping you to tell the story based off of your prior knowledge of the Incredibles movie, which is really cool. And I know that there's this debate of like, oh, there's too much IP in the park, and that's, Walt's vision for the park is being shattered with all this IP. If you look at like the statistics of it, which I did, when Disneyland opened, and I'm talking about Disneyland so much. I still love Disney World. Just know that in my heart, it's always Disney World. But when Disneyland first opened, I looked at the list of attractions and there were, it sounds little, there were only 4 of them that were IPs, but there were only like 11 attractions. So if you percentage it out, it's like 35%. If you look at Disneyland now, just Disneyland, not DCA, it's like 49%. So we went from 35 to 49%. We're still not even halfway there of IPs on attractions in the park. So it went up, it increased, but Disney has a lot more IPs to pull from now. They didn't have that many when Disneyland first opened, but we've got Marvel, we've got Star Wars, we have Fox, all of the rest of Lucasfilm. I guess it's just like Indiana Jones and Willow at this point, but there's more to pull from.
I honestly don't feel like there is ever going to be a original idea ride that's simply just one idea, because there is so much marketing everywhere. They were always thinking, even thinking back to like the Renaissance, the animated Disney movies. They were always thinking of making it a musical, the potential to make it a musical. I think there's always going to be an idea of them having a ride that could potentially be a movie, because we've seen with Jungle Cruise, with Haunted Mansion, Tower of Terror, these rides are Pirates of the Caribbean.
That's a huge one.
They were rides first, and they are becoming franchises. Pirates of the Caribbean has a ton of, I don't even know, 6 movies?
Who knows? There's more coming, I think, too.
So it's its own IP now, after it was just an original idea.
Right.
So even if you think that there's an original idea, in the back of someone's head, this is how they anticipate making a toy, making a TV show, making some, YouTube videos about it
Yep.
or whatever it is. So I don't think we're ever going to see a non-IP ride attraction at a Disney World park.
Look at like, I don't know if it's C or SEA, but it stands for Society of Explorers and Adventurers. It is an idea that there's, not to repeat myself, a Society of Adventurers and Explorers that are named, that traveled the world, found all these ancient artifacts. I don't want to do it a disservice. Just know that there's a group of people, and they've kind of hidden them into different little rides around the Disney parks around the world. Jungle Cruise is one of them. I think like Skipper's Canteen and the restaurant there. There's a few across in the Asian parks, but it's this like little underground society thing that Disney park fans know about, but you can't really say like, oh, that's like Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah.
There's no dedicated attraction to it, but now there's books, and there's going to be a TV show about it on Disney Plus. So they're even taking not even like full-fledged attractions and turning them into TV shows. They're taking just like these secret little underground ideas.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. Like they are going to find a way to capitalize on any of their ideas or any of the ideas that are from the parks. So as much as, people say, oh, we want, an original idea. Yes, it may be a new idea, but they're already thinking of how to maximize, their spread of that information, that idea.
Yeah. Well, like look at Frozen. I'm sure when Frozen was written, the original movie, they were thinking about a Broadway show. Like they had the songs and all these things, and then it comes out, Let It Go is just like, poof, like the biggest song for Disney in the longest time. There's multiple movies, there's TV shows, there's shorts, there's the merch that goes around all of it. There's, the show at Hollywood Studios, there's a ride at Epcot, there's a Broadway show. It's never ending. We cannot let it go. There's even like parks, like themed lands dedicated to Frozen that are going to be rolling out at different Disney parks. Like that's from one original movie idea that is now being implemented. Pretty much you can't go somewhere Disney without finding something Frozen.
Yeah.
And that's just the beauty of this kind of, there's probably like a real term for it, but like a multi-platform marketing approach where they're like, we're going to come up with an idea, but it's going to be pushed out all these different avenues. And it may even be as simple as Encanto was such a huge hit. Let's put Mirabelle in the parks. Let's put her in the parades. Let's have Bruno come out. Let's start implementing those songs in the nighttime shows. And then eventually this blue sky idea comes out of maybe we put Encanto and we put Casita actually in a Disney park. They're testing the waters with it. And it's interesting to see that they're actually kind of crowdsourcing what's happening in the parks with the success of these movies. So the other crazy thing, I did my research on this episode. I was looking at when the last original idea, like non-IP attraction opened in the Disney parks. And some of them were kind of weird, like full disclosure, I looked at like all of them across the world. The one at Disneyland, DCA, was the trolley cars at DCA, which technically it's an attraction, but like it's just a trolley car. It was really Expedition Everest at Animal Kingdom in Walt Disney World, and that opened in 2006. So like mathing that out, that's like what, 16 years ago. 16 years ago was the last time there was a non-IP attraction introduced in a park.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a fun ride, and there's the Yeti and the whole idea of the dancing Yeti and all that.
The disco Yeti.
But I think the main thing to, like, it always comes back to is the guests just actually spending their time and money at these certain attractions. Because kind of to circle back to the beginning, the main one that they talked about was Dinoland being, kind of taken out for the Zootopia.
Getting extinct,
yeah. But it's because, I felt, because whenever we would visit, that was kind of the quiet area of the park.
Yeah.
Everybody was at Pandora, Africa, Asia, like everywhere else except for like Dinoland was kind of we needed some space to just,
Yeah.
be away from people. And Disney sees that too. Disney sees that there's not that many people over there. So I think that's one of the things that as much as people want to say we want these original different ideas, you're showing that you don't.
Yeah. You're showing with your wallets that you don't.
Yeah. And another aspect of it, changing a full area, but there's also the retheming of, particular rides. For example, the Tiana's Bayou Adventure. Mm-hmm. There is an antiquated idea with the world that's continue to evolve.
Yeah.
And I think Disney sees that they have to continue to appeal to a newer audience. And yes, we have there's generations of family that go to Disney, that have gone to Disney, but there is going to be generations that will continue to go to Disney. So we have to keep growing and evolving. The parks have to keep, moving along as well. And I think they see that and they know that. So I think using an IP like this is a perfect way to continue that, that ride.
Yeah. The retheme with Splash Mountain is, I think, a really great one because one, just for location purposes, it works out perfectly for Disneyland because it is over in that Frontierland, New Orleans Square area. So retheming it to Tiana's is perfect. But then also just kind of the history of Splash Mountain, it is the right time to retheme that ride. Yeah. Absolutely. But it is bringing in younger fans that grew up with Tiana as their big princess. And our kids, we're talking about these rides that Jungle Cruise. Our kids are not going to go to the parks 10 years from now and remember that there wasn't a Jungle Cruise. There wasn't always a Jungle Cruise movie.
Yeah.
They're going to just say oh, yep, I've been on that ride. I've seen that movie. They're going to see Pirates of the Caribbean. Yep, I've been on that ride. I've seen that movie. And that's wild. But that's how I'm sure generations were before us for some of these rides that were original ideas that have come into the park. And that's how it's going to continue on.
And I think it has to continue that way because, again, once it evolves, our kids are going to take their kids and it's going to be where, oh yeah, I remember it was this ride, but that generation, that is their ride. And so we can't take that away from that future generation because they're going to have their own Jungle Cruise or Space Cruise or whatever it is.
Space Cruise.
But I think that's one of the things we always have to remember is things are going to change. And, they're going to keep it where we're still happy or they're going to try to, but it's going to have to grow. It's going to have to change a little bit.
And that, ladies and gents, is Walt's vision. It is not to preserve the 1955 opening day attractions and keep them exactly how they were because Walt had a hand in it. His vision was to create a park for families to enjoy. And if that means evolving it and bringing in more IPs and changing the themings of some things because they have become very outdated, or just it's a perfect opportunity to throw, you bought Lucasfilm and so you're going to put a whole Star Wars land and even a experience hotel in there with it. That was the point of the parks, was for families to go and act like kids again and experience those things together.
Yeah.
And so it's not going to hurt the parks to have more IPs in it. If anything, it's going to help families to experience it better because they're bringing in that excitement that they have from those IPs. And then they get to go ride it together and talk about how great it was. IPs are a good thing for the park, in my opinion. In my marketing opinion, IPs are a great thing for the park.
I agree. There's a little bit of appreciation there. So
I think that's a good place to wrap this one up. Thank you so much for hanging out with us for this episode. And there are 50% of attractions out there that do not have IPs on them. Drop us a comment if you're watching this on YouTube with what you would want to see rethemed into what IP.
Princess and Scoundrel is part of the Thank the Maker network. So make sure you check out the guys at Thank the Maker and Mike Forrester at Armor Party.
Until next time.